As a Rurouni Kenshin fan, I consider myself to be pretty lucky, because after all, just look at how many adaptations and spin-offs we've gotten on top of the manga, which is the OG source material. We have the two main anime adaptations, the OG and the remake, the 1999 OVA Trust and Betrayal, critically acclaimed and often regarded as the single best piece of media the franchise has ever produced, the live-action movies, the ongoing sequel manga, the 2011 Kyoto Arc remake, which is kind of controversial, but that's maybe a topic for another video. Restoration, a remake/retelling of the manga released in 2011 as a promotion for the live-action film, and that's not even mentioning the countless filler specials and the anime movie attached to the OG adaptations. So overall, Rurouni Kenshin fans have had plenty to sink their teeth into. And speaking of which... Oh no, oh my god, I don't want to talk about this one, but at the same time I have way too many things to say about it, so I guess I don't really have a choice. Rurouni Kenshin Reflection, or Rurouni Kenshin Seisohan, is a non-canon, please remember that, non-canon OVA released in 2001, and it presents an alternative ending to the manga. In the OG story, Kaoru and Kenshin get married. They have a son named Kenji and basically live a peaceful life while Kenshin slowly heals from the wounds of his past. As a sort of reminder, but I guess if you're here you already know the story and you're probably already a fan, but in case, it's the story of a former assassin that just seeks redemption, and he met that girl named Kaoru and she helped him through his journey, and he just basically meets a bunch of other characters. So the conclusion of the manga is one that I personally really love. Some people think it's underwhelming, but I completely disagree. Sometimes a happy ending is both earned and perfectly consistent with the story being told. Reflection, however, decides to take things in a different direction. And the word different might be a huge understatement. And I don't know who is the person in the staff or the studio that proposed this idea, but there is only two options. Either that guy just completely loves the manga and just wanted to add his own interpretation, or he completely hates Kaoru and Kenshin and he overall wanted to destroy whatever the manga just had to offer in terms of conclusion. I'm joking, of course, things are way more complicated. So yeah, nowadays most fans, including myself, consider Reflection as a completely non-canon piece of media and frankly, a memory we'd rather forget. At least that's the general consensus online, and I've seen plenty of people tear Reflection apart. But surprisingly, I've also seen a smaller group passionately defend it, and some even prefer this version of events over the manga's actual ending. So naturally, I was tempted and I had to watch it. So I finally did recently, and dear God, do I have things to say. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to spoil not only the OVA, but also the manga and the OG story as a whole, so you've been warned. Also, towards the end of the video, I'll be discussing themes such as death and suicide. I'm far from being a professional on those subjects, but I'd rather give you a heads up in case those topics make you uncomfortable. Please take care of yourself first and foremost, that's the most important. Because, trust me, watching this OVA was not easy, and it left me ruminating for a very, very long time afterwards. So Reflection unfolds in two distinct parts. The first is devoted almost entirely to Kaoru's memories. In fact, most of the OVA, and this is a detail that was surprising and in a good sense, is told through her perspective as she reflects on her first meeting with Kenshin and the many adventures they shared together while an illness slowly consumes her. And yes, you heard it correctly, an illness. Because to summarize things without dumping too much exposition on you, Kenshin leaves for China to fight in an important conflict. Because apparently the government cannot function without relying on a single man who's pushing 40, by the way. He ends up spending 15 years away from his wife and child, only returning occasionally. Meanwhile, Kaoru waits for him desperately, and her Son spends most of his time being angry at his father, and we'll come back to my sweet Kenji later, don't worry. While in China, Kenshin contracts a mysterious illness whose origin is... honestly, don't ask me because I have absolutely no idea. I don't know how he contracted that disease. We're barely getting started that I'm already confused. Okay, quick note here, I'm editing the video and I'm not sure if he contracted that disease while he was in China or it was when he came back to Japan, I don't know, but the important information here is that he's sick, basically. Anyways, sorry for the interruption. So at some point, Kaoru deliberately catches the disease because she wants to share in her husband's suffering. And you may ask, well, how exactly does she catch that disease? Don't worry, we'll get to that very soon. If you know, you know. Kenshin slowly wastes away in China, loses his memories little by little. Kaoru sinks deeper into loneliness while clinging to the hope that he'll return someday. The supporting cast worries exactly the way any normal human being would, and as for how all of this mess ends, we'll get there. Don't rush me. And here's my first complaint. Well, it's not really a complaint, it's kind of a half complaint. This OVA is basically a recap. The entire first half essentially revisits the major events of the series through Kaoru's eyes. The recap itself isn't what bothers me. What bothers me is the transition into the second half. Because the first part feels full of hope, it's tied directly to the manga's events, or at least that's how it felt to me. And there are so many interesting additions. The director clearly weren't content with simply adapting scenes one-to-one. The framing is different, the atmosphere is different, some character reactions are different, yet the essence remains intact. It's a surprisingly good balance between faithfulness and reinterpretation. But the moment we enter the second half of the OVA, things become much more complicated. Not everything from here is bad, far from it actually. But we enter this strange cycle of suffering where Kenshin and Kaoru gradually become shadows of themselves. It's like watching two people slowly rot away in the corner of a room. They start saying things I never imagined them saying, and little by little, they succumb to illness, exhaustion, emptiness, bitterness, and helplessness. All of it mixed with just enough hope to make the tragedy hurt even more. As a viewer, it was incredibly difficult to watch, which I suspect was entirely the point. And in that regard, it's extremely effective. Through the visuals, the music, and the sound design, you can feel the slow agony of the couple, and I'm both fascinated and frustrated by this. But before I start complaining too much, I do want to talk about what I liked. Because despite everything, I didn't hate the reflection, not even close. I was glued to my screen from beginning to end, for better or worse, and there were quite a few things that genuinely impressed me. So no, I don't regret watching it. So first of all, visually, the OVA is exquisite. The shot composition is incredible, the direction is absolutely gorgeous, every frame feels carefully thought out down to the smallest detail. The colors are washed out, but always in a way that serves the story, and the show don't tell approach is everywhere. The OVA doesn't drown you in exposition dumps, endless monologues, or characters explaining every emotion they feel. And no, I'm not saying that the manga does that, it's just a way of speaking. Instead, it communicates through glances, touch, posture, and body language. The way characters stand, sit, slump over, and lie down, it's really brilliant in terms of visual storytelling, and it somehow adds even more depth to scenes that were already overflowing with emotion in the manga. The subtlety of the storytelling is remarkable, especially when combined with the gorgeous soundtrack, which, to be fair, is exactly what you'd expect from this franchise. So the immersion is total. This is the kind of viewing experience where I constantly found myself reviewing scenes and rewinding scenes because I wanted to sit with them a little longer and absorb them a little more deeply. Honestly, it's kind of insane to remember that this came out in 2011. It's been more than 20 years, and it has aged incredibly well. Even the handful of fight scenes are beautifully choreographed. this word is really not easy to pronounce. Choreographed. They're fluid, dynamic, and they have nothing to envy from many modern productions. As I mentioned earlier, the retellings of iconic scenes are carefully crafted to remain faithful to their essence while still offering something new. For instance, we have the scene where Kenshin used Kaoru's blue ribbon to cover his wound during the fight against Kurogasa. Kaoru placing her hand over Kenshin's when he tells Yamagata that he wants to protect the people around him. Kaoru pulling away from Sanosuke's grip so she can run to Kenshin before his fight with Kurogasa. Kenshin calling Kaoru by her name without any honorific, and this one is really dear and precious to my heart. The montage of Kaoru dreaming about Kenshin leaving her before transitioning into the firefly scene through a doorway, the parallel with her father's departure for war, her ribbon slipping from her hair and the bright color of the ribbon, the single firefly floating above their bodies as they embrace in the futon, and so many more. I could spend hours analyzing each one of these scenes, but that's not what this video is supposed to be about, so I'm going to restrain myself. Secondly, Kaoru's characterization here is both rewarding and frustrating. Kaoru is already, for me, an excellent character, and I've always loved how she's written in the manga, and it shouldn't be a surprise because come on, it's literally the name, she's the name of my channel. But I've never felt the need for extensive childhood flashbacks or dramatic backstory expansions, because her emotional role in the narrative is already so strong that she doesn't need them. And yet this OVA somehow manages to add even more layers. We see her internal struggle after her mother's death. We see her relationship with her father, whom she couldn't protect. We begin to understand why she dedicates so much of herself to supporting Kenshin, because helping him has become her reason for living. Maybe a little too much, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We also gain access to countless internal monologues where she's anxious, hopeful, at peace, heartbroken, in love. I felt like I was watching her unfold like a work of art in front of me, each petal of flower slowly opening to reveal another piece of who she is. I have no idea where I was going with that flower metaphor, but you get what I mean. We get to see her growth, a growth that was subtle in the manga, well, in my opinion, kind of obvious if you actually care for her character, but here, however, it's made more explicit and it's handled remarkably well. One scene that especially stood out to me was her conversation with Enishi, when he kidnaps her in his island. She admits that she doesn't even know whether Kenshin truly needs her, but she chooses to believe in him anyway and to believe in that idea because she herself needs him. She's worried, she's vulnerable, and yet she's still determined. Those are the moments that stay with you. And while we're on the subject, Enishi was such a great addition, and I wasn't prepared to see this arc being adapted. And if you think about it, it's kind of logic because it was a full-on recap of everything that happened in the manga, so of course they would include the Jinshu arc, but since we never got our proper Jinshu adaptation, it was kind of surprising, and it was a strange experience to see Enishi fully animated and voiced. But anyways,
you dated the brutal dictator of Nicaragua? And she goes, he wasn't the brutal dictator of Nicaragua when I was dating him.
Speaking of character development, let's naturally transition into her relationship with Kenshin, because their romance is already, in my opinion, the most beautiful love story I've ever experienced in fiction, and I'm not even exaggerating. Once again, I'm biased. Don't ask me why, because I'm just gonna fall into the rabbit hole. Anyways, they never needed grand declarations of love or overly explicit and over-the-top displays of affection for us to understand how deeply they cared for one another, and sometimes a single glance is enough. And I never needed more than that, which is exactly why all the little additions in the OVA made me ridiculously happy. We see them holding hands repeatedly, tangibly. We see them embrace, touch each other's faces, and they actually kiss. I repeat, they kiss on screen right in front of us. The way I was kicking my feet, it was so satisfying to finally see these explicit displays of affection because they feel like a bonus. The manga never needed them, but for an OVA that aims for a more grounded, and I'm using that expression very carefully, an intimate tone, it fits perfectly. And I could honestly watch these two lovebirds for hours, and what the fuck are they doing? Okay, well, I wasn't expecting that, okay. That scene genuinely jump-scared me, like, it felt like accidentally walking into your parents' room at the worst possible moments. But jokes aside, I actually really like this edition. You can feel their intimacy, their physical closeness. Closeness. Did I mention that English is not my first language? I know it's not an excuse and I don't know how to read. And I have an English exam tomorrow morning, bro. I'm cooked. And by the way, considering that these two only seem to see each other like once every 3,000 years, I don't even want to imagine how touch-starved they must be every time they reunite. Like, actually, never mind. I don't want to know. All of this physical affection is genuinely welcome, and it's one of my favorite aspects of the OVA. My heart skipped a beat every time they embraced and every time Kenshin touched Kaoru's face, especially after she tells him she wants to stay by his side forever. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire franchise, and it was already the case in the manga. In the OG version, the scene ends with Kenshin looking almost stunned and unsure on how to respond. That's important because we rarely see him that disoriented. As Kaoru awkwardly tries to change the subject of the discussion, he places a hand on her shoulder and they walk together into the sunset, while he quietly expresses his gratitude to her. And that was enough. But for once, I'm not going to complain, because the kiss they added in the OVA actually makes sense. The framing is both romantic and melancholic, it's gentle, it seals the emotion of the scene right before the storm that's about to hit later. The dialogue is even rearranged, and Kenshin tells Kaoru that he will always come back to her, that she's the only place he has to return to, the only place he truly needs, and the only person willing to accept a man like him. Enjoy this little bit of happiness while it lasts, because things are about to go catastrophically wrong. And yet, even beneath all this tenderness, a certain bitterness remains, which is actually something I initially liked. Kenshin's sorrow is far more palpable in this OVA, and you can feel his physical and emotional exhaustion. His facial expressions are incredibly effective, and while there are moments where he feels a little too much like an empty shell, but in the manga version, those same scenes portray him as much warmer. So the reduction of his goofy side makes sense within the tone of the OVA. Now, there are things about this portrayal that I strongly dislike, and some that genuinely pisses me off. But I have to admit that at first it's handled remarkably well. We can feel a version of Kenshin who is much more emotionally tormented, I would say. His smile feels automatic, and not in the sense that it's fake, not forced, quite the opposite actually. It's just the sort of smile of someone who is exhausted, someone who wants nothing more than to finally rest, yet even that is a luxury his own mind refuses to grant him. What truly broke my heart was his gaze during the entire OVA. It's faded, worn down, yet strangely expressive, precisely because it conveys everything I've just described so effectively. Now, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't affected by how drained Kenshin felt throughout this OVA. At his core, he was a deeply warm character. He's funny, he makes us laugh, but he also brings us a lot of comfort to us, but also to the people around him. And here, it feels like the directors wanted to present something much rawer. My problem isn't the idea itself, it's the way it's introduced. The OVA has a real structural problem. As I said before, the transition between its two halves simply doesn't work for me. You can't spend an entire first part selling a message of redemption and cathartic growth only to knock it all down like a row of dominoes during the second half. I'm not opposed to revisiting the tone of the series, but if that was truly the goal, then the flashbacks themselves should have been reshaped accordingly. They should have felt more bittersweet. We should have seen a Kenshin who was more hesitant, less certain of the answers he found, and maybe the point flew right over my head, and maybe I'm completely missing something. But it felt contradictory to take material directly from the manga during the recap portion and then staple it onto a message that simply doesn't belong to it. It could have been a fantastic addition, yet, despite all the qualities I've just praised, my immediate reaction when everything came together was, oh, that's what all of this was building toward? It's the way this agony is presented and ultimately the way the OVA concludes that left me feeling like I was sinking into quicksand. Like, you should have seen me when the credits started rolling. I just sat there staring into space for several minutes. That said, I do want to be fair, because the suffering actually becomes surprisingly relevant when it comes to Kaoru. And whether this was intentional or not, I'm willing to give the OVA credit for it. At first, I expected Kaoru to remain what she has always been, Kenshin's unwavering source of support no matter what. But as the story progresses, her expression gradually grows more and more melancholic. But she keeps smiling, and near the end of the manga, Megumi tells Kaoru that she should try to smile often because seeing the smile of the person he loves most will help Kenshin's scar heal. I recently had a conversation with another fan who pointed out something I found really interesting. At that moment, Kaoru's own feelings aren't really taken into consideration, asking her to keep smiling no matter what, even though she herself has suffered, is slightly selfish. She's being asked to bear that burden for her husband's sake. And you might think I'm reading way too much into this, and I'm convinced that wasn't the manga's intention at all, but taken in isolation, the idea is actually interesting. And this OVA takes that exact concept and pushes it into an absolutely abyssal extreme. It is painful to watch, and you see Kaoru slowly wither away as she begins to realize that Kenshin may never come home. For all she knows, the illness may have already claimed him, and yet she remains connected to him. She knows the story isn't over, so she clings desperately to hope. And at least for me, there were moments where it almost felt as though she had become emotionally dependent on him. And before anyone says, wasn't that already the case in the manga? No, I disagree. Yes, she cries a lot, yes, she worries, and she sometimes falls apart emotionally. But who wouldn't? Especially when it comes to the person you love, and especially when we know how Kenshin as a person functions. But there is something I noticed in the way Kaoru's character was handled, especially in the second half. And even though I said the transition really bothered me and doesn't quite make sense, I'm actually a lot more tolerant when it comes to how this phenomenon applied to Kaoru specifically, because these are things that do make sense in terms of writing logic. I feel like it was kind of already pre-baked from the beginning of the OVA, and I don't know if I'm being clear, so sorry if I'm not expressing this very well. But I feel like the fact that the whole story was told from her point of view is what allows the OVA to become what it became. And that's also why it's called reflection in a way. It feels like its purpose is to tell the story of a woman who is overwhelmed by events. She fell in love with a man whose life is far too heavy for her to carry, and despite all her will to support him, it eventually becomes too much for her to bear. She doesn't break immediately, she holds on for a long time, but eventually she succumbs to that weight. That also explains the very tragic conclusion of the OVA, and we'll come back to that later. So overall, you can feel Kaoru becoming more and more exhausted as she keeps waiting endlessly for Kenshin. And as I said, it really felt like her whole life revolves around him. Even when he's not there, she's just sitting and waiting. And when she speaks to Yahiko, or to her son, or to Megumi, or Tsubame, there is this almost automatic voice that kicks in. She says, yes, I know he'll come back one day. I trust him, he promised me. Because maybe if she keeps smiling, he will eventually come back one day. And I find this so heartbreaking and really interesting. He has a sense of duty that becomes a double-edged sword, and it destroys both him and his family, and his son barely knows him and he didn't see him grow up. That's why Kenji holds such resentment toward him, which is actually one of the most interesting parts of the OVA. But for Kaoru, it's also what causes her suffering. And when they do meet, Kenshin is constantly thanking her again and again, and he's constantly apologizing. So all of this leads to a scene where Kenshin says that all he wants is to make Kaoru happy, as I said. And Kaoru replies by asking him for one thing is to fulfill her wish, which is to stay with her forever, to move forward together and eventually get married. After that, we have a beautiful montage of them getting married, Kaoru gives birth, the two of them raising their child and spending their early years together as a family of 3. It's really sweet, and even more devastating when you know how things end later. And speaking of Kaoru's fate, there's a scene that really stuck with me, and I've been wanting to talk about it for a while now, so here we are. As we know, Kenshin contracts a disease. This illness comes a bit out of nowhere, but it almost feels like a narrative tool used to further punish Kenshin for his past sins. It feels a bit like a device to make him suffer more rather than something fully integrated in an organic way into the story. And I think it's the implied idea here that his body collapses under emotional overload. It's never really clarified, but you can easily imagine that his body was just way too weak because he was emotionally exhausted. But anyways, we then learn that Kaoru also contracts the illness. So she didn't catch it by accident, she wanted to share his suffering. So he gives her the disease through sexual intercourse. So he agrees to this not out of desire, but because he promised to make her happy. And Kaoru pressing her face against his chest, clinging to him, trying to absorb his pain. It reminded me of a scene in Alien Stage, and spoiler for the last episode, entitled Karma, where Mizzy and Sua are in the bathtub, and because Sua knows she's going to die soon and she's afraid of that death, but she also doesn't bear the idea of living a life without her loved one, she takes Mizzy's hands and slowly presses them around her face and then her neck. It feels pathetic, but in the best sense of the word. The issue is that I don't necessarily find this Kaoru more realistic, because being more tragic or more broken doesn't mean you're more realistic. But it's a creative choice that works fairly well for her in this OVA. Now, here's the thing. This whole "I'll wait for you forever" discourse felt miserable, and I know it was the intention, but in the manga, Kaoru doesn't just wait for Kenshin, she actively accompanies him, and here it feels like she no longer has the strength to challenge her husband's terrible decisions and has instead become passive. So at this point, you probably feel like I'm going in circles and I just don't know what I'm thinking, and I keep oscillating between two positions. I like this depiction and I don't like this depiction. So let me get straight to the point. Yes, I think it works in Kaoru's case. She's alone, she feels abandoned, and we see her begging Kenshin to stay with her, and this helplessness is conveyed beautifully. Where I have a much bigger problem now is with the treatment of her dear husband. So, how do I put this? Let me give you a bit of personal context first. Imagine spending one of the most pivotal periods of your life alongside a character who emotionally supported you. When I started living alone for college, that was my experience with this manga and with Kenshin as a character. And I don't want to exaggerate things, but his story and his resilience inspired me to do the same. I watched the character struggle with loneliness, loses himself in it, and yet always find his way back to the people who welcomed him and gave him a home. And that helped me realize a lot of things on a personal level, and it helped me just reconnect with my family and appreciate their presence. So watching this Kenshin, the Kenshin I love so much and who means a lot to me, slowly turn into an amnesiac shell of himself genuinely hurts. Was that really necessary? And is this character assassination? Did we really need to go this far just to create an allegedly more mature alternative ending? Let's put my bias aside for a moment. Does it work? No. I don't think it does. At one point, we're told that one of the reasons Kenshin feels so miserable is that despite all his efforts to help create an era of peace, suffering is still everywhere. Disease still exists, people are starving, loneliness still exists, and realizing that the end of war doesn't automatically mean the end of human suffering completely destroys him. At least that's how I saw it. Again, please take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm not claiming that this is the objective truth, it's my interpretation. Thing is, this idea was already present in the manga, but Kenshin always seemed very clear about one thing, at least by my perspective. He doesn't fight because he actually enjoys it. He fights, well, because he has to, because someone needs to be stopped or because he needs to protect others. But here it almost feels like he's rooted in conflict itself, whereas in the manga portrayed him as remarkably lucid about his relationship with battle and violence. If he needed to become stronger, he would. Am I the only one who feels that way, or do you guys see what I mean? So maybe the reason Reflection writes him this way is simply because he's trying to punish himself, and I think that's the case. We know that he believes that he doesn't deserve a peaceful and ordinary life. That revelation felt completely out of nowhere and kind of contradictory. Maybe I'm too attached to the manga's version of him and would have needed to distance myself from it in order to fully appreciate this. But this whole discourse of peace has been achieved, but people are still suffering, felt so jarring. Like, brother, you wondered for years and years, and you're only now realizing that war isn't the only source of human suffering? Or maybe I'm just dumb and I just didn't understand what happened in the OVA, but I don't know, it felt like angst for the sake of being angsty. But it just felt like the OVA was desperately searching for new reasons to make him miserable when he already has plenty of reasons to feel miserable. What's the point of hammering nails into a character? I want to stress again that I'm not against the idea itself of portraying a more melancholic version of Kenshin, but here it becomes ridiculous. So now let's address the most controversial part of the OVA, which is the ending. So you might be asking, what actually happens at the end of this OVA? Well, if you're still here, I'm assuming you've either already seen it or you just don't care about spoilers, which, by the way, thank you for staying that long. You are really patient. So at the end of the OVA, Kenshin dies. Yeah. Like, I don't care at this point. I'm just throwing that shit up. He dies. He dies in Karu's arms, and Karu also dies. I don't know if she dies at the same moment or if she dies months or like years later, but anyways. So don't get me wrong, the scene itself is beautiful. Like, there's no denying that. They are in each other's arms, they embrace each other tightly, the composition is gorgeous, the cherry blossom petals floating around, it looks stunning. Everything is handled with really great care in terms of visuals. So, the whole ending is too abrupt. If you absolutely want to kill them, even though I really don't think it was necessary to go that far, then at least do it earlier so the audience has time to process it. Because as it stands, it just ends like that and you're supposed to take that information and go with the rest of your day and your life. So they die, Kenshin's scar disappears, okay. I'm accepting that, and symbolically it suggests that the only moment he truly forgives himself, the only moment he finally achieves genuine peace, like genuine inner peace, is when he dies in the arms of, by the way, the woman who has always offered him unconditional forgiveness. But we're kind of talking about someone who looks relieved and kind of satisfied when death finally embraces him. Truthfully, the ending isn't actually that shocking if you pay attention to the OVA's opening sequence. The OVA begins with what I assume is like a metaphorical scene where we see Kenshin sinking into the depths of the ocean while thinking something along the lines of, I'm finally free and I can finally rest after all those years of suffering. From the very beginning of the OVA, we are introduced to the idea of death as something that frees him, and something that's almost comforting. And if you're familiar with Kenshin as a character, this isn't exactly new, and it's really present in the manga. Particularly near the end, during the Jinshu arc, where Kenshin repeatedly dreams of that one place filled with skulls, the remains of all the people he killed, and it's even referenced in the remake's first opening. He's sitting among those bones, completely drained, convinced that this is where he belongs, the hell reserved for murderers like him. And throughout the series, Kenshin also flirts with some suicidal ideation? No, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and I want to apologize if what I was saying and what I'm about to say feels too harsh, or just if I'm not expressing this in a respectful way. I apologize, it's not my intent. I'm just, at the end of the day, a manga fan analyzing her favorite manga. But especially during the final arc, there are moments where Kenshin is so broken that he barely seems functional. The difference is that he doesn't actually die. Maybe because ever since Tomoe's death and all the murders that he committed, he's haunted by the idea of dying without leaving some form of goodness behind. Abandoning his life or abandoning his sword would mean abandoning all those lives that he has taken by himself. The problem is that Kenshin never believes he's done enough. No matter how many people he saves and no matter how much good he does, it seems like it's never enough in his eyes, and because of that, he can never earn the right to leave this world in peace, to die in peace. So he's kind of trapped in this endless loop, unable to die, but also kind of secretly wishing to, not dying, but like just being free and rest. So that's why after Kaoru's fake death, we see him sitting there completely lost, exhausted, hollow, almost corpse-like. And that's why I've always interpreted part of his psychology as flirting with suicidal ideation. And even beyond that, we know that sacrificing himself for others is something that comes naturally to him, because he consistently values other people's lives more than his own. And that's a trait that's been a part of his character for a very long time, and that's even one of the main anchors of his training arc with Seijuro, when Seijuro tells him that if he wants to become stronger, he has to value his own life, because if he dies, the people he wanted to protect will be sad and devastated by his death. The message of the manga is not necessarily to learn to live in harmony with it, because for someone like Kenshin, that's kind of impossible. But at least learning to let the past exist and let your previous mistakes exist in a corner of your mind. It's a story filled with introspection, especially when it comes to the main character. And ultimately, it's about accepting that maybe you'll never be able to love and forgive yourself, but you can surround yourself with people who make you feel at home, people who help ease that pain, because the pain really never goes away. It becomes part of you, but you can learn to live alongside it. If you work toward making the people around you happy, then that happiness eventually reaches you too. And that's something we understand very quickly about him as a character. He loves helping people, he loves reaching out a hand, and it's a genuine source of strength for him. Seeing the people around him smile gives him a reason to keep going, a reason not to give up. All of this is also present in the OVA, and that's why some people might think that I'm exaggerating and that I'm being too harsh with the OVA, because so there's this internal conversation with Tomoe, and it's the moment when he finally finds his answer, the realization that he must keep moving forward despite his mistakes. What's important is learning to be patient with yourself and learning that change takes time, and sometimes you do need to collapse emotionally. You need to just observe your loneliness and your sadness in order to move forward. But the OVA overall seems to be trying to communicate something different. The problem is that I genuinely can't really figure out what the message is supposed to be, and for the past hour I've been throwing out theories, interpretation, and possible readings, but I still don't know where this OVA is trying to lead me. What am I supposed to take away from it? At one point, Kenshin visits the mother of one of his victims. She calmly tells him that she cannot forgive him for taking her son's life, and she asks him to not come back anymore. That moment breaks him. And I actually thought this addition was very interesting, and it adds another layer, a new obstacle. But I've seen many people take that idea and conclude that Kenshin never deserved, or not exactly that don't deserve, but that they seem to think that someone so deeply haunted by his past actions realistically shouldn't be capable of finding inner peace. I understand that logic, but I hate it just as much. It's incredibly defeatist if you think about it. The idea that if you're broken enough, well, you'll never recover. The most coherent meaning I can give to this ending, if I really try to interpret it in its favor, is the following. No matter how much Kenshin tries to live a normal life, his body is there to remind him that he doesn't deserve it in some way. Ultimately, he's simply not physically capable of it. That's probably why his immunity gradually weakens and why he contracts this extremely rare disease. Kenshin's body constantly reminds him of where he came from, because Kenshin has lived for so long convinced that he absolutely doesn't deserve to live that peaceful, normal life. Even though he's now surrounded by a loving family and friends, his body constantly reminds him of where he comes from. And of course, there's also the fact that going off to fight in China thousands of kilometers away wasn't exactly the most stable decision. So he gradually contracts this very rare illness that he did not choose, but in the end he ends up accepting it as his kind of like fate. And that's precisely why he chose to keep fighting until the end, because he wants to leave his final moments having accomplished something good. In a way, the message will be more about learning to live with your sins, but also that some wounds and some pains just never disappear. And more than that, it's not just the wound that remains, it's the pain itself. Because you can have a healed injury, scars everywhere, but if there's no pain, it's manageable. On the other hand, you can have a small wound somewhere on your body but never forget the pain it causes, even long after it was supposed to be healed. That's the idea I'm getting from it. But it doesn't make sense for two reasons. The first one is that if we take into account all the flashbacks, all those speeches about living until your last breath, and all of Kenshin's idea that he will learn to live in better health alongside his family, all of that is unfortunately lost and diluted into a message that, taken on its own, is interesting. But it just ultimately doesn't work with the whole structure and the way the structure of the OVA was handled. And the second point that makes this ending really disappointing for me is that wasn't that also the outcome of the manga? The ending of the manga, the original ending that we all, I assume, love, wasn't about completely forgetting your past. The Kenshin we have at the end of the manga that's married and have a son doesn't seem to be a Kenshin that's completely freed of his chains, and I think that ultimately he'll never be able to free himself from those chains. And that's why the last page of the manga, the last panel, and I'm not taking into account the bonus chapters that came afterwards, but really that page when you can see him alongside Kenji and Kaoru tells him that now he can take some rest. Meaning that, he's not healed yet, his scar hasn't disappeared yet, and he'll probably, for the years that are going to come, to be haunted by his past, but he can learn slowly and even painfully to just live a normal and peaceful life and accept the reality that he'll never finally be able to free himself from his past actions, because those past actions are an integrated part of him as a person. Building a family and a household isn't going to magically heal him. So what's the point of killing him? What is the point? Once again, I just don't understand. I honestly think that reflection was a good experience, and I've even rewatched it several times for the writing of this video. It left an impact on me, maybe even too much of an impact, and sometimes I find myself thinking, why does this even exist? But at the same time, I'm glad it exists, because it gives us material to think about, to discuss, and this kind of alternate universe allows us to put things into perspective and deepen our understanding and interpretation of the OG storyline. So in a way, I'm thankful. I'd love to hear your own interpretation of this OVA, your own opinion, if you hate it, if you love it, if you have more of mixed opinions about it. If you enjoyed this really long video that was really messy to write, I wrote 100 different versions of the same script and rewrote it because I wasn't satisfied, and ultimately I think that I can talk about it for hours because I have so much things to say, but I'm going to stop for now because it would just be really confusing for you guys. I also plan to cover other Kenshin OVAs and special episodes, and also live action movies, which by the way, a new review of one of the live action movies might come out soon. So if you're interested in hearing me yapping and just talk straight up nonsense for several minutes, then feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.